minute, but before I do that, Chris, do you have anything that you need to alert us to before we jump into public comment and then the first item on our agenda?
Only thing I've got is we did spend a little over an hour, Jennifer and I, today with Q2 and with our communications folks. Victoria will be here next Monday giving a full kind of update on all things relative to utility billing. We're still working through some of those same challenges, but the consistent message, we still are not finding errors because the actual meter system and the software that reads those meters has not changed. So there haven't been errors, no late fees, no turnoffs, payment plans for anyone who asks for a payment plan. The other half, 21 roughly 1,000 bills are expected to go out Wednesday. Heads up, that does include the Heights as a part of this next group. About 6,000 of those are sewer only. We're hopeful that that means they'll all be right. They have been accurate, but that things will go out. And there's just a number of tutorials that the staff have put together that I've asked them to just literally walk you in the public, anyone who wants to walk them through. They're on our websites, we're pushing them on social media, things like that. But I think it would be helpful for you to see them walk through so an individual can go back and literally look at their water consumption, look at their bill, understand it. Of course, some people have had leaks, about 10%. Of users, according to the EPA and our stats, don't show much different than that, but 10% of customer bases will have a leak from time to time. And with all of this seeming uncertainty, people assume either they've got a leak or they're certain that they don't have a leak. The good news is the system, it's undeniable when there's a leak there because it literally will show water running through that meter every hour of the day. So all that continues to move forward. And like I said, they'll be here next Monday. And Q2 said their story. They weren't certain, but probably this week they'll run that story. Also interviewing some folks on social media who have been expressing frustration with their bills. So we took, like I said, about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half with them today, working them through the whole thing and showing them examples of all the things that are going on. So that's all that I have, Mayor, until we get into the agenda.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll open it up for public comment on all items now. If you would like to comment, just come to the podium and just keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address.
I have a handout.
Chris. Sorry. You can too, but Karen is just sitting so low.
Oh, she is. What did they do to you? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Cole and Council, Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South. I brought you a summary of, there's a number of us, St. Vincent de Paul, Salvation Army, and Bethlehem Lutheran and myself have provided showers 2 times a week for unhoused folks since March of 2023. And we've done, since then, about 1,400 showers using 2 shower spaces and working 2 days a week. So that's one of the pages here. The front page is what I want to address, is our need for a low barrier shelter. Since March of 2022, when the first shelter stopped operating, you guys funded some of it. There has really been no low barrier shelter in Billings, and the need is great for it. MRM is not a low barrier shelter and wasn't back then either. And a lot of people don't qualify for it. And we've been over that. I've said it many times. Last winter, you did nothing to ensure our community provided shelter for everyone. And from my experience with the unhoused community in Billings, I estimate that well over 100 individuals spent the winter sleeping out on the street, in doorways, under bridges, and wherever they could to protect themselves, even a little bit from the snow and cold. MRM's emergency shelter was not an option because they experienced unsafe and rough conditions there, which I have raised to you before. And some of them were thrown out for seemingly random reasons. Several people who did not have shelter died last winter. In my experience providing showers to our unhoused neighbors, many people suffered greatly, not only from with the pain and but with physical things like frostbite. It's just ungodly. Have any of you seen frostbite, where somebody loses a toe or a finger? We have people that have lost all their fingers. We have people that have lost their toes. And we had some last winter. We watched the progress of this week by week. We have to have some kind of sheltering for these folks. MRM does not do it. Off the Streets Motel 5 only offers, I think, up to 12 free beds, but the conditions there are rough. They're rough at MRM. They're not fed, there's limited water, there's no blankets. It is really rough and ungodly. I've said all this before, and you have not been interested, but I'm asking, requesting, begging you to consider putting this issue on the agenda, on your agenda at some point soon. Because this affects the whole health of our community, and it's an urgent problem. There are a lot of people that have spent this whole year sleeping out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on the agenda or not? No one's coming forward. We'll close the initial public comment period and get into item number 1. Which is our International Fire Code. So, Chris, we'll turn it over to Assistant Fire Marshal Jamie Fender, unless you had anything in the way of interest. No? Okay.
Mayor, Council, hasn't recently. Okay. So last night, 9:25, got an email, and it was Councilmember Neese about you guys not being able to see the red lines on the memo. And that's the first I heard about it. So I want to apologize. It had to do with how I inputted it in, and I had no idea. I thought everybody saw it until last night. And so then I was up all night scrambling, trying to figure things out, and it's been a little bit of a whirlwind. So just to clarify, and so everybody understands, when we're doing the fire code adoption, what I'm looking at doing is adopting everything that the state of Montana is adopting. The reason I'm here tonight was to just present 3 sections of the fire code where I feel it'd be beneficial if we were a little stricter on, 2 of which we've had in place for the last 10 years, and I can just explain the reasoning behind this. Is this not work?
I can move it. The mic is on, and just so you know,
Oh, okay.
Council members, I'm forwarding this presentation to you as soon as I move it. I've got it going right now, so how's that?
Perfect. Okay, so just so everybody understands the adoption process, because I feel like there's needs for some clarification so everybody understands. So, and then Jessica can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the codes work, the state adopts the building code first. Once the state adopts the building code, the rest of the local building officials adopt exactly what the state building department adopts. And so this is done with all of the I codes, everything except the fire code. So now the state fire marshal's office, the state fire marshal will then adopt the state fire code, and he coincides with what the state building department adopted so that they sync up. After he adopts that, then it comes down to the local jurisdictions to adopt the same code. We have the ability to be stricter on the fire code as you see fit to each AHJ. So that's part of the reason for this presentation tonight, was just the 3 areas outside of everything else that I feel we could be stricter, and then I can just explain the reasoning behind it. So just for the MCA is law, so local building department are required to adopt the same code. That's MCA 5060-302. State fire code is then required to be adopted by the local HJ. That's MCA 5061-102. So we don't actually have a choice on that. We have to adopt the minimum requirements of the fire code. By not adopting the same code as the state, we can actually lose our status as a certified city. So meaning, we're out of compliance for a while now for a couple different reasons. But by us not adopting and us being in the 2012, but the rest of the state is in the 2021, the state fire marshal can technically take the fire authority away from the city of Billings. Now, I don't foresee that happening. I don't think he wants anything to do with that, but there's just an urgency to get the fire code adopted. Hence, me bringing and working late hours of last night and then all day today to just be able to present this information to you to move forward with it. Yep, please. So one of the first things that I'd like to be more restrictive on is permits. So what I have on the left side is what the MCA has. MCA 2312-601 Section 5 did not adopt permits. So the state fire marshals they don't adopt permits. They have no reason to have any permits. City of Billings, the city fire department, we want to adopt permits. We've had permits in for quite a while. The reason we have them, and these permits that the fire marshals have are separate than what the building department has. They have the fire protection permits, the building permits. The permits I'm talking about are open burning, ditch burning, firework display, fire extinguisher training. They're just open burning permits. Now, to just give you an idea of how many I deal with, last year I had 12, I think, and the majority of those are the city of Billings that want to do vegetation mitigation. So when they have an abundance of weeds, they come get a permit from me to be able to just burn the weeds. And when they get a permit, that allows us to be able to check on access, check on water supply, determine if it's a decent time to. We never really run into any issues with that, but our dispatch they're supposed to notify dispatch as soon as a permit gets activated. So in the event somebody calls, hey, we have something burning over here, dispatch is already aware of it, we understand what's going on. In the event of fireworks display, like at the Big Sky State Games, they always get a permit for there. There's certain parameters that they have to set around there for people viewing. So we go out and we set those parameters. We make sure that people are abiding by what's set in there. So that's the one thing that I would like to have set with permits. And we've had this in place for as long as I've been in the fire marshal's office, which is 12 years now. So that's one part I'd like to be stricter on, was just the permits. MCA doesn't have it. I'd like to maintain it or keep it. This section, the second section, is water supply safety factor. So what the IFC has, water supply for automatic sprinkler systems shall comply with this section. Standards referenced in section 90331 for connections to public waterworks systems. Water supply tests used to design fire protection systems shall be adjusted to account for seasonal and daily pressure fluctuations based on information from the Water Supply Authority as approved by the fire code official. Where I would like to just be more, because I feel like that's kind of broad terminology, I would just like to be more specific and just put in a minimum safety factor of 10%, but not less than 5 PSI shall be provided for any automatic sprinkler system hydraulic calculations. This is just an industry standard. There's a lot of AHJs that enforce the same thing. Helena does the exact same thing. Talking with FSCI, our third-party review, this is, like I said, a national standard that a lot of people utilize. A good example of this would be, well, if you have a building, just so everybody understands what I'm talking about. If you have a building, there's fire flow requirements for the sprinkler system to effectively mitigate a fire inside of that building. We want to have a safety factor for the water supply to adjust for fluctuations for the demand of the water system. So let's say we have a structure fire that happens at 0600 in the morning. Well, everybody's running their sprinkler systems. Everybody's taking a shower to come to work. So the demand of the water system can decrease, and now we don't have enough water going to that building to effectively mitigate a fire. So we put a 10% safety factor in there. 10%, but not less than 5 PSI. This also isn't a new amendment. This has been in there again for as long as I've been in there. I'd just like to maintain that. And then this is the last section I think I feel it's beneficial to be a little more strict on. So IFC right now, monitoring fire alarm system required by this chapter by the International Building Code should be monitored by approved supervising station in accordance with NFPA 72. What I would like to do is we have what's called dual and sole path communication. Excuse me. In the 2012 edition that we're currently in, all fire communication systems require dual path, so 2 forms of communication to the monitoring company that's monitoring all the fire protection systems. And this can be cellular, this can be internet, this can be POTS lines, like actual phones lines. So we require 2 of them. Well, this happened in 2012. Technology is so much better now, they allow sole path communication. So you just need 1 form of communication instead of the dual. The dual right now is actually holding up a lot of, I don't want to say holding up projects, but it frustrates contractors because most buildings, especially new buildings, have cellular access right away, but it takes a while to get IP to these projects. Well, they're required to have 2 lines of communication. So it gets really frustrating for a lot of these contractors, and this is one of the biggest I want to say benefits to us adopting the 21 code is the contractors are elated that we're going to sole path communication, because everywhere else in the state, they only need 1 path to communicate to the monitoring company, where we're requiring 2. And it's been super frustrating. I've heard from every single fire alarm contractor wondering when we're going to adopt the code to get to the sole path communication. And like I said, we're about a year and a half past 2, so I've been hearing it actually a lot. But the one thing I wanted to get more specific on is the sole path communication. I would like to have it be cell only for sole path, because if you have IP as a primary, if the power cuts out to that building, now you lose your communication, which triggers backup battery, which triggers generators. It's not that big of a deal in a small building, but if you have a large scale building where you have to have repeaters, a bunch of different broadcasting signals, all have to have battery backup to maintain that signal for IP. I don't honestly foresee that ever really being an issue, because 99 to 100% of the time it's always cellular. I've actually never ran into somebody that's asked if they could do IP only, but it alleviates a lot of that struggle for them doing IP, and then it would trigger all of this other stuff that they're going to be required to have if we were going to go that route to IP only. I mean, those are the 3 things I would just like to be more, and just again to reiterate, everything else across the board I want to adopt exactly like the state does. And so that was part of the red line that I was trying to work on, and me and Karen were working on it, is to just be able to address everything and show, okay, this is what the state does not adopt. City of Billings does not adopt this as well. State doesn't adopt this, we don't adopt this as well. So we're just hand in hand exactly with the state. So we're not trying to be any more stringent except for the 3 things that I brought up, and if council's okay with that. So just a couple different talking points. We're currently out of compliance with the state of Montana. They're more restrictive than the city of Billings. We're the only large municipality in the state of Montana to not have the 21 IFC adopted. These local amendments do not present a monetary burden to the public. This adoption and these amendments assist general contractors, designers, architects, fire protection contractors, and all plan reviewers by aligning with other I-codes. It clears up confusion on fire code requirements in the city versus other jurisdictions, because a lot of these contractors, they're working all over the state. So it's not like they're just working here. We're the only one in the 12. And then kind of what I touched on before. Sole path communication is the largest complaint among fire alarm contractors, as all other AHJs allow it through the 21 IFC. Dual path forces contractors to find another additional method for communication, oftentimes forcing rapid IP installation.
Questions? Okay, very good. Thank you, Fire Marshal. I assume your correct title is Fire Marshal. It's not
Fire Marshal,
as opposed to just Marshal. Then that's the guy that carries the gun. So
whatever you want.
Fire.
Sounds good to me.
All right, questions. Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you. That was very clear and concise. I appreciate that. What mechanism going forward will prevent a state of Montana approving it in March of 2023 and us not doing it until now? There's got to be a mechanism that triggers not even if you break a leg and you're not there. There has to be some way that the system works without the fire marshal. It shouldn't be this is kind of a no-brainer. Why don't we fix this kind of thing?
Thanks, Councilmember Boyette. So talking with the state fire marshal today, I actually asked that to get clarification on it. And they're in the process of trying to mimic what the building department does, where they're requiring a time frame for you to adopt the fire code. The same thing like the building department does. I don't exactly know where that's at in the process. I just know that they're working on that. I don't want to say that. I feel like maybe we might be the example or the reason behind that, why they're looking to do that, but that is coming down the pike where they're going to try, once the state adopts the fire code, all AHJs have a certain time frame to get it. Now, what that is, 3 months, 6 months, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Gulick.
So why haven't we adopted it yet, I guess, is the question.
So,
and then before I'll let you do that. I'll also just mention there's some jargon, AHJ with the authority having a jurisdiction is the reference. So that would be our building officials and whatnot is the AHJ.
So I've been the fire marshal for 5 months now. So without getting into too much deal about what happened with previous administration, previous fire marshal, I can just say that since I've become the fire marshal, I've been working diligently to try and get this process in. When I originally became fire marshal, I presented some of the work that got started from the previous fire marshal to try and change the process from a city ordinance to an administrative order. And part of that whole process is not understanding how everything works, and then the learning curve with everything. I don't feel like that's how council wanted the process to move forward. So then I basically kind of started from scratch, and then now here we are up to this point. Rough answer. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jamie, or Fire Marshal Jamie. A couple of questions. Could you go back to the slide that shows the burn permits for a minute?
It's going to be permits. Yep.
Okay. So you're listing here ag for ditch burning, fireworks display, and then fire extinguishers training. I'm assuming there must be some businesses doing that type of thing. So I want to have a bonfire in my backyard. Do I have to get a permit?
A bonfire, you do, but like a recreational fire, if you have an approved recreational fire pit in the back of your house, then you don't. And that's part of the section that we're addressing in city code, because the terminology can kind of get crossed between open burning, bonfires, recreational fires, all that stuff is going to get it. But we actually took that process out because I don't want people to need a permit to do a recreational fire in their backyard. But now open burning is something separate. So if we don't have any permits, nobody can do any burning whatsoever outside of recreational fires in the city limits, because it's illegal to do open burning. So with a permit, now they have a little wiggle room, the ability, like having fireworks at the state game, city being able to do agricultural mitigation, that type of thing. But as far as just recreational burning, they can do that right now. They don't need a permit for that.
Okay, and so is this going to be a permit where they just call up and say, hey, I'm going to be burning today, and there's no application, no fee, or what's the permit process going to be like?
So, yeah, once they contact me, we sit down, I just get their information, the date of the burn. We just kind of go over some specific information as far as when to contact dispatch, what to let dispatch know. There's no fees. It doesn't cost anything. It's just more so for us to be aware that there's something going on in the event of an emergency. And it allows us, in the instances where they're shooting fireworks off, to be able to go out, see where they're shooting these fireworks off, create distances, because there's standards for how far they need to have people if they're going to shoot large diameter shells or just the small stuff. It gives us the ability to kind of take a look at what it is they're doing. And like I said, without this process, there isn't any burning in the city. So it's to allow people to be able to have some wiggle room.
So I was just mainly focusing on the open burning for a moment. I haven't got to the fireworks yet, but the open burning, how much lead time would someone need if they're going to burn some rubble in the backyard? And then are you saying they have to call 911 to let them know that they're burning?
All they would do is they would contact dispatch. There's just a dispatch number and just say, hey, we're just activating a burn permit. So if somebody calls in, they would notify our crews responding in the event of hey, there's an active burn permit going on, because crews would actually respond differently knowing this is a full-blown structure fire as opposed to maybe, hey, there's an active burn going out here. This is probably just somebody burning their ditch.
Okay.
Something like that.
All right, so when it comes to firework displays, this is typically, well, Big Skate Games, nonprofit, different habit. So is there, again, same thing, no type of cost for the permit for you guys to go out and inspect the area to make sure that they're meeting whatever standards they have to?
No, currently we don't have any fees for that. I mean, I think I did one, maybe two firework permit, and it took an hour and a half for just us to go out and walk the perimeter and make sure that, because all the people that have done it, they've done it numerous times, so they have an idea of what's in place. So they already have their parameters set up. We just take a walking wheel, just make sure they have them established so people know, and then they just contact dispatch.
These permits are more a notification basis to make sure that you guys don't panic at the fire station to send the truck flying down the street to put out a fire that's just burning some garbage or something. Okay. All right, I do have another question, if you don't mind, unless someone else, Mayor has someone else in questions. Can you go to the next one where it was the water pressure? I guess I'm not quite sure if I understand the 10%, a safety factor of 10%, but 10% of what?
10% of whatever the hydraulic calculations are for the building. So when the building gets designed, a fire protection engineer would submit a set of plans to our third-party review showing the requirements for that building. Our third-party review then, how it's set up now, FSCI would add on an additional 10% to just adjust for that fluctuation, whatever that number is, depending on what the building is.
So, for instance, a two-story building is going to have a higher requirement than a single-story building. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. And then can we go to the communication slide for a moment? So you're mentioned that the cell service would be available right away, and that's what you're kind of recommending is the primary source be. Is the requirement to have that connected as soon as the building is, even before it's occupied? Is that the reason why you want the cell service there?
Correct. So in order for us to approve the building, all of their fire protection systems have to be in place. And part of that is after we test the fire alarm system, we call the monitoring company to make sure the monitoring company is getting the signals that we test, which can include tamper switches, water flow alarms, pull stations, whatever it is. Part of that our checklist is to contact the monitoring company and just find out that they got those signals. But cellular, by the time these buildings get built, cellular is always available. It's IP that takes forever. And so being able to, it almost speeds up the process, and I thought that's what a lot of the fire alarm contractors are most looking forward to about us adopting it, is to just be able to get to that process.
I guess I'm not quite sure, because they're not going to occupy until it's done. And so when it's done, then the network will be in there, and then so it should be, that's when you guys finish inspection. Is that, do I understand that correctly? So whether it's done before through IP or done later on through the network when it's connected, you're still not going to sign off on it until it's occupied.
Correct. And that has actually come up a couple times where it's taken whoever the internet company is, they're booked out a couple weeks to be able to push internet there, but everything else on the building is done. And so that's the only thing that we're waiting on. And so on those instances, because everybody else is doing sole path, we've actually allowed them to fill out an alternate method request to just go sole path. And me and Jessica have talked about, they can sign off and say, hey, yeah, this is sole path. Everywhere else is using it. The current standards allow for sole path. And so instead of holding the building up for 2-3 weeks for internet to get pushed there, we'll allow them to do sole path for cell. But I mean, that doesn't happen that often, but it does happen.
Okay, so the current code that the state adopted is sole path?
Yeah, the current code allows sole path.
Sole path, and then it just allows the builder developer to choose which path they want. And what you're saying is you want to require them to have cell service.
Correct.
It's a primary and a backup option if they want it. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, when this comes back to us for adoption on a regular business agenda, I just want to make sure I understand. We've got 5 pages of changes. Some of that deals with what you've got here, but the International Fire Code is several hundred pages. So if we're adopting several hundred pages and we've got 5-ish pages, what happened to the other 195 pages? I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're adopting what's already there because that is the International Fire Code already, but we're making these small changes, those 3 that you've identified, but there's also some stuff in here that's not those 3 things that are, I would characterize maybe as house cleaning or miscellany stuff. So can somebody just explain what it is we're looking at in these 5 pages? I understand the 3, but what's the other stuff and where's the other couple hundred pages?
So how I foresee it going is, and I was mimicking what some of the other AHJs was doing, Great Falls, Bozeman, all of these different authorities having jurisdiction are adopting things a different way. The city of Great Falls blanketed the exact same thing from the state. We're adopting Fire Code 2021 according to the arms such and such, and then literally copy and pasted it. The city of Bozeman is adopting everything that the state isn't. And so they're doing stuff completely separate. Helena is doing both. So everybody's kind of doing things a little bit different. How I foresee it going, and working with Karen on the whole process, is to be able to have everything exactly the way the state has it and say we're adopting the International Fire Code according to the state arms such and such. Here are our local amendments, having the 3 amendments, and then everything else is just addressed right then and there so you can.
Okay, so I see now in the first sentence, it says International Fire Code 2021 edition is adopted by reference. So go out there if you really care about the other 95 pages and look at it. And with the exception of what's spelled out in the 5 pages.
Correct. And Mayor Cole, there were some things that are currently in our ordinance, in our code, that actually now have been incorporated in the International Fire Code. And therefore, they're no longer needed to be in our city code. They're just extraneous and redundant. So we did do some cleanup and take out those things that have caught up to the International Fire Code. That makes sense.
I think so. Thank you very much. Other questions for Jamie or for Karen? Councilmember Neese?
I do have some more questions. Let me pull up this, I think the state adoption, just to clarify, because we are adopting this. Apologize, I had it on my screen and I got to find it right here again. Okay, section 4 of we're adopting, because it's adopted by the state, it says the code shall apply to new construction as required in the building code and existing conditions. Existing buildings shall be maintained in accordance with the building code in effect at the time of construction. However, where existing conditions or buildings proposed an imminent hazard or risk to public health and safety are not met. Therefore, the purview of the building code, the FPIS, may take corrective action pursuant to the provisions of MC, and goes on about the MC codes. Do we know who in the city is going to determine the existing buildings are no longer going to meet their code based upon when they were built, and now we're going to be subject to this new code that's being adopted?
Well, so all new construction is going to come out of the building code. So existing buildings, that's going to come out of the fire code. Now, how we determine if that's going to be a hazard?
Right, that's what I'm getting down to. Who is determining that? What is our criteria for that? So as people look to rehab different and older buildings, they can determine whether or not they're going to have to abide by the new code, or they can redevelop under the code based upon its existence.
So Councilmember Neese, Jessica Foost, building official. Just want to speak to any construction or rehabilitation would fall under the building code, as Jamie said. So the code, we adopt an existing building code, and the existing building code goes through depending on the level of alteration that you're doing or the level of remodel. And then also if you're changing the use of the building, that's when new codes might be in effect. If it's a building that's continuing to be used for what it was built for 100 years ago, it can continue in that same state. What the fire marshal's office role is in existing buildings is if, and generally it's complaint driven, if there's a complaint like this building seems unsafe because there's been some alteration in the interim, that's when they'll contact the fire marshal's office to come do an inspection. And I don't know if you can speak more to that. But.
Well, no, I think I understand that. So, but you mentioned that if the building department determines that now it needs to meet the new code, then it has to meet the new fire code as well. And so I guess the question I have on that is what the building department is determining or is adopted, is it same as the state that they have that, or did we add things like we have the option to add these 3 things to the fire code, where now we're being more stringent on new developers of existing buildings? Is that what we did also in the building when we adopted the International Building Code?
So Councilmember Neese, the city is required to adopt exactly what the state adopts for building codes, and we do not adopt anything more stringent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. I don't see any other questions, so it's not a business meeting. Anything else, council, in the way of directions to staff before we move to item number 2? Council Member Neese?
Yeah, I think as far as the option here, what Jamie is, at least that I gathered and talking a little bit before the meeting, he's wanting to hear from council whether or not he would if we thinks the code should include cellular as the primary or not. I'm apt to say, no, I don't think so. I think we should allow that to be the developers, because if they really want that, get that building online, I don't see any reason why they couldn't go cellular first, get it going, if that's what they really want to do, and then switch it back to IP. But to require a business, whether it's small or large, to have that additional expense on cellular, I would say leave it up to the developer to determine how soon they can get opened.
Councilor Neese, let me just ask you a question to see if I understand the question. My understanding of the proposal is that we would continue to require 2 sources of communication in the case of a fire alarm. However, then there's an exception to that, is if they want just one source, they can have one source as long as it is cellular.
No, he's actually, I think the new code is single source. Yeah, the new code is single source, but he's indicating that, but the ordinance is saying that you have to have cellular as a single source. If you want a secondary source, you can use IP or dial-up, but the city code is going to say cellular.
You can have a single source that is the internet now. Or under the existing International Fire Code, any single source of communication, there must be some specifications that would be sufficient. And you're saying we should let the developer have that option.
I agree. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And the flip side of that is if the power goes out, so does the fire alarm go out. And that's your concern, right?
Well, it would trigger backup. It would trigger alternate power supplies to all of the communication systems if they're going to go IP. Because if the power does cut out, the internet would cut out, and
those alternate power sources are required? I mean, they have to have those.
they would be required. Yep.
But they choose what they want. So if they want to choose the IP, they can do it, and they have to have the backup. If they want to choose cell, they can do that. They still have to have backup for the cell, or if they can choose a POTS line, which is typically in POTS line, you don't need any kind of backup.
So basically, we would just cross out that section because it would just default to the existing international fire cut, is what you're proposing, Councilmember Nice.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it'll still provide what the industry says they want, is that single source of a notification.
Okay, so that frames the issue. Council, what do you want? Do you want to give some direction to staff on that issue? I think I understand it better now. Jamie, let me kick it back to you because you're the one who made the proposal, your department. How big of a problem would that be to allow single source from internet, for example?
Mayor, to be absolutely honest, it wouldn't be too big of an issue. It would just be more stuff for us to check as far as the battery backups and generators if the building were bigger enough. It would just be more stuff for us to inspect. But, I mean, we can certainly do that.
Other cities, they just adopted the International Fire Code regular provision on this. Is that correct?
Both. Some jurisdictions just did the cell only. Others just adopted the fire code.
Some have adopted the cell only. Which other cities in Montana, if you know?
Not in Montana. When I was talking to FSCR third party, they've had a couple jurisdictions through there that have done the sole path. That's where this conversation came in when talking with them. They said it's just triggered more inspection processes, bigger hurdles for people to jump through if they went that route. But I mean, we can certainly do that.
Mayor?
Councilmember
Yeah,
Nice?
during the inspection process, I'm assuming you're charging a permit fee for doing the inspection?
It comes out of the building department, though.
Building department. So the only thing I can say is, I mean, if there's a preferred method, we could sure say there's a preferred method or a fast track method or something like that that is cell service if you think that's the best option and it's going to be less work for the city. And also, I don't know if you can even do a different permit level because if you're like you say, network, you've got a lot more to inspect, then the cost of that permit is going to be higher. Typically, the developers are going to choose the lower cost. But in the long run, it could be more expensive for the user of the building. But again, I do want to make sure that the developer has that option. And maybe they like the network at first and they're going to switch to cell, who knows? But I sure would hate to force the residents or the commercial buildings into doing that.
Okay, what does the rest of the council think? Personally, I guess I don't care too much. It sounds like they're likely to just go to cellular anyway, so it wouldn't be too much of a burden on our time, but there is some impact there. What does the architect say?
I think I agree with Councilmember Nice, and just in terms of, this makes it a more performance-based code rather than a prescriptive. And I mean, I think, as the mayor said, I think it's almost always going to be cell anyhow, but I'm open to making it, I don't know, there could be some circumstances we haven't conceived of where it might be better for the other route, so I'm fine with that.
I would just like to add one comment to the discussion. So if somebody came to us and said we wanted to do an IP, we would allow it as an alternative, as a performance versus prescriptive. So to Councilmember Gulick's point, but I think that the biggest thing we see is a disconnect between the contractor and the owner, because a lot of times those AV and IT items, those are owner items. So the contractor wants to be done and out of there, and they haven't set up the internet yet. Someone else comes in and does that. So we do see that at times when someone wants to get their certificate of occupancy, the contractor wants to be done and move on and let the owner come in and set up the internet, and they don't have their fire alarm system working correctly because they wanted to run it through the internet. But if people want to do it that way, we wouldn't be opposed to it.
Okay. Councilmember Gulick?
Well, so let me have a follow-up question, if I may. Ms. Building Official, do you see then as possibly a problem in terms of there being a contractor and building owner or occupant not communicating, and so this could create problems?
I would say from time to time that does happen. And like I said, it just depends on whose contract it's in and who's setting up the internet. But a lot of times that's not in the general contractor's scope of work to set up the internet connections. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Councilmember Ripsis,
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't have any comments on that item, but I had something else. If
please.
Okay.
On this item, on item one, though, right?
Yes, on the IFC. So there are a couple other things in here that are different than the IFC, and this goes back to the mayor's, talk about the 5 pages of stuff we have. One of them is talking about the Group R and sprinkler systems. And we're seemingly putting in some exceptions in there for buildings that don't require sprinkler systems. Is that adopted under the state code? So those are exceptions under the state code that we're also replicating here. It's not something that we're doing different than the state.
Yeah, Councilmember Roops, yeah, that comes directly from the state. That's not local.
All right, and the same thing for the daycares, talking about 15 instead of 5 children
Correct. Come from the state level.
from the state. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, I don't know if you got anything real clear, but I wasn't hearing anybody advocating real hard for cellular as sole source of single connection. That's what I was hearing. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll thank you, Fire Marshal, and we'll move on to item number 2.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Just like he's back on shift, right?
All right, item number 2 is our employee pay review processes. Thanks, Councilmember Kennedy asked for kind of a deep dive into that process.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'll turn it over to either Councilmember Kennedy or Chris to sort of frame it, and then Carl is here to provide most of the meat. So, Councilmember Kennedy, this was your initiative. Feel free to take this away.
Thank you. Part of the budgeting process is anytime you have raises, we have contracts, labor contracts, we have all of that, and that affects the budget. And the one big part of it, and I'm brand new, is as we started delving into the budget, we had different things happening with pay scales, pay raises, different things that never came back to this council. It's not saying that a year ago or 2 years ago, a pay study was okayed by the council to go forward. It never came back and talked about how the pay scales and the pay changes and everything actually affect the budget. So I want to say one thing before you delve in, is as we looked, and the one area that I was caught off guard, and I know other council people were, is on your top elected officials. And I know you were in the middle of negotiations with the Teamsters, but we also got information from other people that kind of put us, knocked us out of our chairs, because there were some figures and everything and some changes that was assumed by HR and the staff, but the council didn't have a clue on it. So when I asked for this initiative, I sat down with Chris and I sat down with the Assistant City Administrator, Iflin, and we talked about each of these areas, which makes sense in a lot of the areas. But still, as we budget from year to year, and as we also looked at the budget from last year, that there was a contract that was signed that wasn't actually perceived and put into the budget the way it should have been. And we had a shortfall, and we also with overtime and things like that. So what I'm trying to do is to make sure that the council and the mayor and the public all understand the type of dollars we're looking at, and also looking at, as we start our planning, which we're starting for next year's budget, to make sure that we don't get knocked off our chair, and we know what the consequences are if we go with a 1%, if we go with a 5%, or we go with an overall change, such as the longevity or elimination of longevity, things like that. So all of that plays a part in the budget. If in between times you put someone in one position and someone hires, it's not our place to hire or whatever, but it is our place to look at the overall budget and know how you got there before you start hiring people or moving people in another pay raise. Because I just looked at 11 of the top director, the information I had on the top 11, and that was a difference from 23 to 24 of $206,000. I mean, it's not small change. And it was also, and we also have a car allowance in there, which I noticed got added in as a total, which was over $48,000. So as we're talking about any changes in pay, and it's just not a 1% or a 3%, these are real dollars that affect the budget. And I know that we had people coming back and saying we had 950,000 overage, overtime hours, and also we didn't go from probationary to regular time, and that wasn't figured in the budget, and we had a shortfall. I want to make sure that I understand before I vote for a budget of exactly what changes are taking place from year to year and how you got from one place to another. I now understand the going from step 1 through step 7, which I didn't understand before. And I also understand a little bit more where we went with the pay study. But I still think that was left out of the whole discussion on our budget is what is the overall cost to be able to do some of these and move them forward. Because we only eliminated the longevity for a certain group of people. And that was the group of people that I just mentioned that, well, that was $250,000. So when I'm looking at, I'm not looking at that you gave another person $1 an hour or whatever. I'm looking at the overall major dollars that are affecting the budget. And so that's why I came forward, Council, to look at it. And I know there was asked about, has anybody asked about budgets or what people make or things like that? Doesn't make any difference if anybody asks or not. What we're looking at is the overall budget impact for each of these things that are implemented through HR. And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Very good. Thank you for that explanation. We'll turn it over to Carla after Chris.
So I guess the question, here's what I asked Carla to do, so tell me if we're on the right track or not, which is I asked, because one of the things Councilmember Kennedy, we talked about was the transparency of not only you, but the public understanding the system. So you've got the memo, about a page and a half. I asked Carla to just highlight the system and how the system works. And then we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. It sounds like that's a good approach, and so though we don't get to see, we get to work with Carla every day in administration and human resources, you guys don't get to see her very much. So Carla's going to walk through the process, as is said in the memo. She and human resources and admin really administers the program with the help of our class and comp committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carla.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to start with giving you just kind of the history, okay, of where our pay system evolved from, okay? And it's, is this on?
It is, but you got to really talk
Right here. Can you hear me now?
Barely. Just speak loudly.
Wow. Usually I can hear myself, and I cannot hear myself tonight. Is it on? It is on. Okay, is that any better? No? No?
If you keep your voice up, we'll be fine, but keep your voice up.
Okay, I'll try. How our system evolved over the years is in 1994, the city hired a company called Personnel Services, and they developed our pay system. And really, if you think about it, it has not evolved a lot over the years. At that time, they developed a pay system where every position had a grade. And there's also, and that runs on the side. I don't know if we have a copy of the actual pay matrix. You've all seen the pay matrix. You're familiar with it. You have it in front of you.
Would it be helpful if I put the non-rep pay matrix up? Is
I
that?
guess I have one here. If you all have that to follow, I don't know if you have it in your packet. But anyway, if you look to the side here, there's a grade. And that grade is attached to a 7-step scale. And you'll see that on the Teamster scale, it runs like 130, and there's like facilities maintenance support, and then you see two other jobs in that pay grade of 130. Then you don't see anything until 135. Well, that doesn't mean we don't have a grade 131 or 32 or 33. It does. We just don't have any positions currently in that grade. So you'll see that those numbers skip along the way, okay? But if we listed every single grade, there would be 1% between those grades. So from 130 to 131, it would be 1%, 130 to 132, it would be another percent. And then if you go across, it goes from step 1 to step 2 is 5%. And there are 5% increments across the 1 to 7 steps. And that was developed in 1994 by Personnel Concepts of Personnel Services. In 2006, the city took another stab at implementing another pay study. And that was conducted by Fox Lawson. We paid over $85,000 for that. They met with employees individually. We wrote job descriptions based on what, employees were saying their job was. And in the end, that was not implemented. The one thing that did come out of it is we did have a good set of job descriptions that resulted from that. And then every time we have vacancy now, those job descriptions are updated every single time if there's anything that needs changed. Okay, so that was 2006, and it was not implemented other than job descriptions. In 2020, at the end of 2019 for 2020, we hired Gallagher Benefit Services to conduct another study. We as a city decided we needed to look more toward the market. We were having a tough time recruiting and retaining people, but it became very tough for all employers when COVID hit. And so in 2020, we get through this study, and what Gallagher did is they used a benchmarking system. So they took 50 of our positions and benchmarked them and did a salary study. We asked over 30 other cities that were comparable cities in Gallagher's eyes to the city of Billings to participate in the study. As you can see by the memo that we had, only 15 participated. You can't make them do it. People are busy, and sometimes they don't participate. If you do participate, you get the survey free. Otherwise, it costs you $1,500, $2,000, whatever. But we did get 15 cities to participate. And then one thing you need to know, too, that when that city participated, if it was a Greeley, Colorado, or whoever it might be, then Gallagher would take that data of those benchmark positions, and they would adjust it by the cost of living. So it would be comparable to City of Billings numbers, okay, cost of living rates, all right? And of course, COVID hits at that point, nothing happens with this study. We come out of COVID, post-COVID, we had difficulty like we've never had hiring people. People could stay on unemployment. They were getting bonuses to be on unemployment. Many people were making more money if they were on unemployment than if they came to work. So we struggled. At that point, we started bringing in everyone in a system that really withstood this test of time. We could bring people in at step 1 or step 2. Post-COVID, we could not do that. We were lucky if we could bring them in at 3, 4, 5, or 6 on a 7-step scale. That was our first red flag that said, we have to do something with pay. We have to compete, we have to get good workers, And we were really falling behind. We'd hire equipment operator, have them a week or two. Sometimes they wouldn't even make it a day or two, and they were leaving us. If someone was giving them a quarter more or 50 cents more, they were leaving. So we had to make a decision because that was costing us so much money. My staff, all we were doing was onboarding and exiting people. It felt like that. We weren't progressing forward. We were just onboarding and exiting. So at that time, the city says, hey, Chris says, hey, we need to look at, let's looking at a market system. Let's look at market pay. And really what drove that factor was when Kevin Plone, our airport director, retired, and we needed to find an airport director. Everybody that knows anything about airports, even in Montana, they are highly paid positions. Our position at the time at step 7, so keep in mind, not step 1, at step 7, it was $148,000 in 2023. We had to hire a recruiter. That recruiter said, you will not find anyone, you can't touch anyone for less than 175, and good luck if you find someone for 175,000. And really, we are still the lowest paid airport in the state of Montana. We were fortunate. We had a few people apply. We had an individual out of a smaller Wyoming town making $226,000 that applied for our position. In the end, obviously, he wasn't interested when he found the pay wasn't moving high over $200,000. So anyway, that is when we really started to look at, we had a pay equity issue. We hired the airport director. Our city attorney at the time is making $148,900, the same as our airport director, the same as the chief of police and the fire chief. We had a two-tiered system. At that time, we had to say, we have a pay equity, sex discrimination issue if we don't fix this. That is why, at that time, the city's only data they had was to go in and look at that 2023 or 20 Gallagher study. I reached out to Gallagher and I said, we need to update this study. Fortunately, they did it at no charge, and they aged it to January of 2023. At that time, the city made a decision, or administration, I guess, made a decision to tier out the directors because there was no way we could bring them all up that far. Okay, but we had pay equity issues based on sex. So we tiered out to 4 levels. So we went from a 2-tiered director system to a 4-tier system. At that point, the directors and assistant directors, they were also included in that, and longevity was no longer being paid to that group. Okay, keep in mind, or you may not know this, 2 years prior we had a police contract, and we negotiated that they walk away from longevity. And we created a new pay matrix for them. They no longer got longevity. So it was our goal when we rolled into Teamster contract negotiations, we wanted longevity to go away. It was going to go away for Teamsters. It was going to go away for non-bargaining because it had already gone away the year before with fire. When they adopted the new pay system, they no longer had longevity. So the only group that had it was Teamsters and the non-bargaining group. So our goal rolling into negotiations was to do just that. Eliminate longevity for everybody, Teamsters and then non-bargaining, because we had to get it out of all of our union groups before we could take it away from non-bargaining. So that being said, as you know, Teamsters negotiations couldn't have been more challenging. So we roll into negotiations with the intent to eliminate longevity, the intent to take them to a market pay, and they fought us on that. They fought us tooth and nail on going to market. And I mean, and really in our equipment operators, there was good raises, and we couldn't get them to take it. And in all honesty, and you know that history, we warded off the strike, but in the end, we had to have a floor of 3.5%, and then grandfather the people in for longevity. Not the way we wanted it to turn out, but I do believe we kept people in the loop on that. And when we look at the whole overall pay picture, we had budgeted 5%. We knew inflation had been 8 and 9% over the previous 2 years. Negotiations were going to be tough, but we put in 5. And, fortunately with non-bargaining, it landed at closer to 3.5, or I think it was 3.5. Don't quote me on that. I know it's in our memo. And then then with Teamsters, we had to go higher because we had to establish that 3.5% floor in order to get a deal. So in an effort to do that, it was higher. It came in, I think, 6.6, if I recall that correctly. So not where we wanted to be, but again, very, very challenging. And one thing to keep in mind, it seems like we always have one contract, like rolling into next year in '25, we'll be negotiating police. But we already know what's set for Teamsters and for fire in those out years. You know, so we'll negotiate with them. We will do our best to keep you in the loop, whatever you need us to do there. But of course, you know, fire has 3%, July of '25. We have 4% with Teamsters, and then police will be the one that we'll have to determine in next year's negotiations. So anyway, the really reason that that whole 2023 change was made was we had a sex discrimination case. I mean, in all honesty, if we didn't fix that, we were going to have a lawsuit. Probably said more than I was supposed to say. Anyway, so that being said, when Gallagher then, you know, gave us that information, we aged it again, broke the tiers out into those 4 tiers, and then we knew that I'd been talking with the Teamsters, and I said we really want to look at a market-based system. So what we did is we met with a bunch of vendors, software vendors along the way, because we felt that was going to be the most cost-effective way to do it, but it was very labor-intensive. We had to go through every single position, and so we ultimately contract with a company called PayScale or PayFactors. They are used by thousands of employees all over the country, and it is a database built with compensation experts. Obviously, that's what they do day in and day out, and they have over 11,000 job descriptions. So what we had to do in HR, we took every Teamster job description and we loaded it all into the system. We loaded our pay plan into the system, and then we had to go through those job descriptions and see what we could get as the best match. Many of them were simple, others were not, and we would have to like take even 2 or 3 job descriptions and blend them to get them to be the number we needed that to be, so it would be closest to our job description, if that makes sense. Very time intensive. Once we completed that project, it rolled to this class and comp committee that Chris talked about, made up of about 7 directors and assistant directors, and we're very seasoned, for lack of a better word. We're not old, we're just seasoned. And what I mean by that is this committee has been together for a long, long time. Anytime the city would have would need to, like, maybe we'd get a new position and we wouldn't know where to place it in our current structure, we'd send it to the committee. We have a meeting of the committee. Usually we're doing it once or twice a year. And we look at the job description, what's changed, or what is this new job, or maybe if someone thought their duties had really changed and they needed to be reclassified. This committee has done this for a lot of years based on our current system. So what we did when we had all the data, the committee got together for three and a half full days just to go through the Teamster positions. And what we looked at then, if you look at the equipment operator one, I don't want to bounce around too much, I tend to do that, but if you notice the equipment operator position, you know, what we decided to do as a committee is we knew that 50% of market wasn't cutting it here in Billings. So we said we believe we need to be at 60%. A lot of employers are at 70 or 80 or 90, but we felt we needed to at least be at 60. So what we did with this pay factors data, it had data for like governments, and it had data for like the Western region. And we compete with many of our positions in the private sector. There's obviously police and fire, not so much. But when you look at an equipment operator, an attorney, IT person, we're competing with the private just as we are with the public. So what this committee decided to do is we took, if you see that form, you know, it had a 50th and a 60th%. I apologize, the equipment operator did not print that when I printed it off. It was on my screen, but it did not print for whatever reason. So anyway, you can see, so what we did is we took the Western region and we took the government at 60th% of market, and we averaged them. We thought that would probably be the fairest way to look at those. So we blended the private with the government. The government was always, of course, a little lower, private sector was a little higher, but we felt that was a good way to look at it. So that is what we did. And then we went through every position and the pay and looked at it. So, okay, this position, like an equipment operator, showed it was 11.8% underpaid. So we placed that in the structure where that 11.8% fit. Okay, and we looked at every single, we had like 70 Teamsters and roughly 140 non-bargaining positions. We looked at every single one of them. And then we placed them. But what my point was with the Teamster positions, if you recall from the memo, we said 60% was at step 5. And with the directors, when we looked at it, and assistants, we put 60th percentile at step 7, okay? But on the equipment operator, because we had such a difficult time finding those people and keeping them, the committee said, you know what, we need to bump that one. So that one got bumped a little higher than the step 5 at 60%. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, or if I'm just rambling and I've lost everybody. Anyway, so the committee then looks at pay equity internally, truly, because we still need to be equitable to all of our employees internally. If we don't do that, we have a lot of unhappy employees. So we did our best to look at that. And again, a very seasoned group of people have been on this committee a long, long time. So we finished with that. And then we roll into negotiations with what we thought was some really good data. And of course, you know all that story. So I don't know if I think I'm still rambling. Shut me down if you need to shut me down. Maybe that buzzer will go off and I can stop. Anyway.
We'll hold our questions, so write down your questions so you don't forget them.
Anyway, so I don't know if you have questions of, I think you understand the pay matrix, how we came to be where we are today. And, I know that the airport director was a big hire for us. I mean, in all honesty, Councilmember Kennedy, it was tough. We were in a tough spot, but we could not hire anyone under $175,000. We couldn't get them to apply for this job. So we felt we had no choice, and our recruiter said, if you're not at least at 175, they won't even look at it. And we just kind of had a handful of apps. We didn't get a lot of apps. We had a handful of apps, and that's why that triggered that change for the directors and the assistants.
I think the only piece I would add is, as we said in the memo, the system, Teamsters and non-represented, so you're talking, 750 employees plus or minus, they really do work on the same system. Police and fire being the exceptions, market still needing to be a driver. Moving longevity out, basically that philosophy was just this straightforward, that though longevity pay was nice for folks who were here in year 7 through 40, particularly as you've been here for 20, 25, 30 years, in my opinion, it was doing little to nothing for us to recruit. To tell somebody, well, just wait a decade and then you'll start seeing the benefit of this, didn't work. It also is the case when we did the Gallagher analysis that in a perfect world, if we could have wiped out all of longevity, I'd say a perfect world from an administrator standpoint, the math, if you zeroed out the longevity and you got moved to market pay, the numbers weren't that far off from each other. The challenge was, of course, there were 3 labor contracts, and there was clear direction from legal based on past litigation with the city of Billings and failures at the administrative level from the court saying you have got to move longevity out of those contracts. You cannot move it out of the non-represented outside of directors and assistant directors. They told me I have the authority at that higher pay level that I could make that decision to try to use that in part to set the tone that that's the direction we were heading. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
And the other thing that the committee looks at when this committee gets together is they look at compression issues too. Because when, we're taking our senior equipment operators up pretty significantly, or equipment operators and seniors up pretty significantly, we're getting closer to those supervisors in solid waste and, street traffic. So we make sure we look at that too, so that there isn't too much compression there. Otherwise, you'll have no one wanting to apply for your supervisory positions. So.
Okay, anything else, Carla, before we open up for questions?
I'll stop rambling.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you to comment on one thing, and then we'll
Okay.
turn it over to Councilmember Kennedy, because this was his initiative. We want to give him first shot. But could you address Councilmember Kennedy's kind of big picture ultimate question, which is how all this impacts budgeting? And specifically for our next budget cycle, fiscal year 25, my sense is that we now have locked in mathematically, we have a lot of certainty for the next budget because it's built into collective bargaining agreements. But maybe I'm missing something, or for the non-bargainings, what is remaining to be determined that will impact fiscal year 25 budget?
Mayor and city council, actually what we'd have is police. The rest of the rates, well, and non-bargaining, depending what you do with non-bargaining, or what we do with non-bargaining. But yeah, police is the one we're negotiating next spring. But otherwise, we are locked in with fire for next year as well as Teamsters. So that we know. Those are two knowns. What we don't know is where police will land and where non-bargaining will land.
Okay.
And typically, we follow suit. I will just say this because, again, to avoid compression, we don't want to be taking our Teamsters up 5 or 6% and then taking the non-bargaining, the supervisors up 3. I mean, we try to keep that pretty consistent so that we can keep these pay scales running along and avoid compression issues.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Kennedy?
I guess, Carla, one of the things is with the unknowns this year, and not with the Teamster contract, it was, part of it was as you were working through and doing market value for all the department heads, they were kind of lost in the shuffle. They weren't, but the numbers were lost from us. And so as we start looking at the budget, and they were put in the budgets, there's a time that we should be able to look at and say, we don't have those kind of dollars to do what you really want to salary-wise for the year. And we didn't have that because they were put in the budget. And it was like, well, you either have to come up with more money or we have to cut a capital or we have to cut this or we have to cut that. So I felt that it was real disjointed. I understand the Teamster contract was out there, but there were some other changes. And as I said, $250,000 in changes just on the top administration that really did affect the budget this year. Chris?
Councilmember Kennedy, Mayor and Council, what I would say is when we're most likely to run into something that's different that will affect a budget in a meaningful way is when we make market adjustments. And we don't, as a whole in the system, we don't make market adjustments across the system every year. So you saw non-rep leadership, directors, assistant directors, directors above. We made that change in April of 23. After that point, their adjustment was 3%, and this year 3.5%. You see the same thing with the Teamster contract. This year, market adjustments, they ran from a floor of 3.5 to a high, I think, of 14. Then you'll see what is a very customary or an inflationary adjustment. So I think that's what you should consistently see going forward. But for those times when we think we're out of whack, outside of a position or two. I mean, I think it's, though, I would agree with Carla that the airport director, I would say this, it forced us to deal with the issue we know we had to deal with when we saw the study back in 2020 and weren't ready to make the change. And we needed to deal with it. That's where I would see that again. I have no crystal ball, so I can't tell you if it's going to be another 2 years from now or it's 3 or 4 years from now. Does inflation get back to a normal, 2-3%? Or do we see cycles that start hitting us like it did there for a little while? Those, I think, would be the drivers where those difficult decisions between the budget, administration, and the elected body would be, okay, how are we going to address this, or are we going to address this either in a labor contract or outside the labor contract? Just a quick summary, as Carla said, year to year, non-represented group is not guaranteed anything. You have 3 labor contracts, and you need to, as an employer, we need to be careful recognizing those non-represented employee groups are supervising and working with those labor groups. And so the truth is there is a connection between those, and we try to look at what's the contract and what's inflation to try to be a competitive employer living within our financial means. Thanks.
Okay, very good, thank you. Other questions, Councilmember Bernice and Councilmember Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Carly, it's a couple questions,
Oh,
but.
I'm sorry.
No, I want other people to talk
Do you?
first.
Okay, okay. We'll come back, Councilmember Kay. Councilmember Bernice?
Thank you. Just a couple of clarifying questions. You mentioned in the study was done, the pay study was done for the western region. And is that like west of the Mississippi? I mean, we're not really that close to the west coast, so.
It did include the coast.
It did include the
Councilmember Neese.
coast.
In all honesty, it really took like from Montana, Idaho, Colorado, Wyoming, obviously, New Mexico, Arizona, down to Arizona. And that's where Montana fell in that data.
So we fell on the farthest east side of their little dividing line. Okay, it seems to me like maybe the western area was a little bit higher, but you did say that they somehow were able to adjust those based upon cost of living.
Yes.
Okay, is there any option to do studies like that would include more of the Midwest states that we're more a part of, I think, in a lot of respects than the West Coast?
Maybe a different software. Yeah, this one was not set up that way. Montana was actually included in the western region.
Okay, and then Mayor, another question on, when it comes to this committee and stuff, and again, I'm not sure if I fully understand the process, we've always, we approve a 3% or 4% or whatever, 2.9% raise in the personnel line. What happens to that pool of funds once it gets into your committee? Do you divide those funds up and say, well, this pool is going to be looked at management supervisors and we'll divide it amongst them, and this amount's going to be divided amongst the, the non-supervisors? How does that come about as far as, because the reason I'm asking this is because when we saw during the union negotiations, several positions were getting like 0.1% raise, 0.5%, very, very small minimal raises. And so, but yet at the same time, we were approving 3% or more in funding, but here these positions are getting, nothing. But then we find out directors are getting, 10 or 15% raises. So how does that committee work as far as taking that money and distributing it to the different employees?
Councilmember Neese, I hope I'm understanding your question. What we did there is, when we truly looked at market, that's what we did. So if that position said they should be at 14% and we felt that was okay internally with equity, that is what we did. And then, there were some positions that were showing, maybe 1% overpaid. And in the end, we had to set that floor with the Teamsters to avoid the strike. So then that became that 3.5% floor.
Well, that was during the Teamster negotiation.
yes.
But I'm talking about prior to that, when we
prior
saw
to
the directors getting 10 or 15% raises, and then the Teamsters are telling us during that same time, employees would get a very small percentage. So, I mean, it almost seems to me like that we approved a 3% pool of funds, and that got deferred over to the directors, and then there wasn't enough money left over to give raises to the employees. That's what it looks like to me as I look at that data from what the Teamsters presented to us. Is that not how you did that? Or when you're looking at giving raises to different departments, you say, listen, we don't have enough money left over, so we're only going to give you a 2% raise or 1% raise because that's all the money there is.
Typically, we're almost always locked into two groups because of contract negotiations. So there's usually that one group out there waiting to negotiate that next year, and then the non-bargaining people. So we can usually project at least two of the four groups fairly closely, and for the budget purposes. And then the other ones, we put in a number. I mean, administration talks about it with Andy Finance, all of that, and we determine what can we afford. We don't announce that number to those groups because we're negotiating with them usually that spring.
Chris, can you comment? Because I don't remember actually approving a percentage
No.
for non-bargaining, for example. It's baked into the whole budget of individual departments,
So
I guess.
a couple of clarifications. Number one, the April of '23 implementation, and that sheet was shared in the July 19th email and again this afternoon. Those adjustments for assistant directors and directors range from 0.7% to, what is it there, 16.1%. On the Teamster side, now the average, and that's just a crude average, because no one, I don't think, got 6.6%, but a crude average was 6.6. Same thing on the Teamsters, They would, if we just would have done market, you would have seen some as low as 1 or less than 1, up to as high as 14. But the negotiated floor was 3.5. So that's how Teamsters and non-rep, then non-rep this year, we used that same floor, 3.5%, and implemented the market. It just so happened that for that non-represented group, they were clearly closer to market pay because the average of all of that cost us 3.5%. So that's part of the answer to your question. The other part is when you say budgets most commonly were put together with probably close to a 3%, 2.9 or 3%. This last year, 5, because we knew we had some market challenges. The committee doesn't debate, okay, well, how are we going to dole out 5%? We knew in order to implement what I just talked about and what Carla went through, there were going to be folks who would get less than 3.5 or whatever the floor was, and there were folks that would get higher, but our budget was put together with a cost in payroll increase of 5%. No one got, say no one, someone in that list I'm sure got 5, but that was just to have money in payroll to implement the system. What you typically see year to year is the inflation adjustments, what put in the budget, while we're out there negotiating a labor contract that hopefully is going to come in pretty close to what the inflation adjustment is, or we've got to come back to you, or we got to figure out where else are we going to make cuts in order to afford whatever that negotiated agreement is.
But Chris, to answer Councilmember Neese's question, once that overall budget number was approved, you decide and department heads how that money is divided. That was his question. And that's correct.
Using this system, we don't individually decide to treat people any different than
but based
the
on
implementation
the
of
system.
this system.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Does that
Okay.
answer your question? Because we don't, say, oh, that, an equipment operator this year is going to typically get more than an administrative person. Is that, I don't know, is that answer?
I think my question's answered.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ripsis, we'll come back to Councilmember Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Carla, Chris, I guess I have more of just a philosophical question. Having always worked in the private sector, generally my pay increases were tied to my performance, and that's something that I didn't hear. It doesn't fit into this. What role does an individual's job performance have in their compensation at the city?
We don't have a pay-for-performance system. Places I've worked, they've affectionately called my systems a no pay for no performance. It doesn't mean everybody gets a raise. You have to perform at a base level in order to get the adjustment. Is it true that there's not a long list of people who aren't there? It's a short list, but what I have seen over the years and what I inherited here in Billings and what I've seen both here and before is that on the government side, there's not enough resources or training or human resource capacity to make sure that there's real equity and fairness to a pay-for-performance system. I've tried it, and it's caused tremendous morale and other problems. And that doesn't mean we ignore performance. There are people, as you know, who've been let go. We've litigated those issues. We've typically won those. But that's how we handle the performance side of things.
Councilmember Roops, it's just so the non-bargaining system they're not locked in. I mean, a director or a supervisor could say, no, you perform poorly, you're not getting your step. However, it does not work that way with our Teamster, with our union. On your anniversary, you just move through it regardless of performance. So then we have to deal with that through corrective action and try to change performance.
Councilor Ripsis, or
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. So great, somebody in their first 7 years, they're not performing well, if they're in that non-represented group, they don't necessarily get that step increase.
Correct.
After 7 years, can they not necessarily automatically get that inflationary adjustment, or does that
That
becomes more automatic?
Yeah, would be given, that would be automatic.
Okay, all right, thank you.
okay. Okay. Councilmember Kennedy, I said I recognize you. Councilmember Owen and Espenlander, on this topic, I think, wanted to follow up on this. That'd be okay?
great.
Okay, Councilmember Owen?
Sorry, Mayor, not specifically on paper for performance.
Mine's not necessarily there yet.
Okay. So, Carla, I just kind of want to ask, where are we going from here? Will you be redoing the Gallagher study? Are you content with the payscale.com or pay factors? Where do we go now?
Well, with Teamsters, obviously, we're locked in for 2 years,
Yeah.
you know, and then it would be 3 years, sorry, 3
But
years
I'm sorry, for your non-bargaining,
for non-bargaining.
are we redoing studies or?
I mean, I wouldn't say next year. It was, you know, too time intensive. And actually, once it's built in there, just so you know, Councilmember Owen, we can age that data. Okay, so once that pay project is done, we can hit a button and it will age it to whatever date we want it in the future.
I get
So-
that, I guess.
Okay,
Oh, let me
so-
just drive at my point.
Okay.
I would hope the next time we do market analyses, comps, all this sort of work that I know you and your team have to do, and it's pretty labor intensive. I get that we are classified by national market data where we're classified. And I get that the Gallagher study is looking for peer studies, peer communities, because that's where we're recruiting. But if I'm a taxpayer sitting at home, I don't particularly care what they make in Bend, Oregon. That doesn't matter to me. So I would ask that our compensation committee, maybe, I don't know, call the league. Let's get some Montana data as a part of the analysis so that when council is talking to people, we could say, look, here are our peer cities, here's other Montana cities, here's our national benchmark. But I think the fact that we're generally, it appears, not looking at any Montana data specifically, I just think that creates a sense of, well, yeah, if you're shopping in the expensive markets, obviously the pay scale is going to be higher. And I know that that's making Chris hop a little bit, but I really do think that we need to be respectful of the people who pay these paychecks, and I'm not sure that it looks that way.
Yeah, prior to purchasing this software, that's exactly how
Yeah.
we did that, truly. We still have the data for Great Falls and Bozeman and all those cities. And we do look at it, especially when the class and comp committee didn't have the tool that we had. That was our tool. You know, I would reach out to all the HR directors, send me your pay information, and they do the same. We exchange that, it seems like weekly.
Sure.
We're always, exchanging, at least with the top 5 or 6 cities
Yeah.
in Montana.
I want to know that for certainty that when we're looking at cities where we're recruiting into and doing talent attraction, that we're also saying, but gut check, how does this compare to the rest of the state? I think that's important.
No.
Chris, you wanted to come on then? Okay. Okay.
I just wanted to ask one last question that's a little bit ancillary, so I apologize. But on our city website, our human resources manual is listed as from 2005 and in process. Is that still the state of play?
It is.
You're not allowed to leave until
have
we
it.
adopt it, right?
Let me just say, I
It's all-
have 4 things on my list of things to do before I depart the city. And the review of the final HR policies is one of those.
Okay,
Yeah.
what's our rough approximation of when the update will be done?
I'm leaving on October 3rd.
Okay, so,
Yes, we actually did revise all of them.
yeah.
And we're just waiting now. They've gone through MMI approval, and that was good. And
Okay.
then we went through Associated Employers approval. We have them look at handbooks as well, so they did that. Now we're just waiting for legal to check the box
Thank
on the
you so
last
much.
one. Great. That's been haunting me my whole career, just so you know.
The
Very good.
fire
Thank
code
you
was
very
the
much.
other one.
You're okay?
June tonight?
Then back to Councilmember Kennedy.
There's a few things. I don't understand your car allowance. Most places, and if you look around the state, they pay for mileage. It's a lot cheaper on your budget, and you pay for mileage in, if it's your department head or whoever. You have some people that are getting a car allowance that never need it because they don't ever leave their office here. So the question I have for you is, why do we have a car allowance and it's just carte blanche that we give a person $4,800 for the year? Why don't we go back to mileage that if they've driven from one place to another? The other concern I have is when people are using the city cars and they're still getting a car allowance, I have some real concern over that too. So can we address car allowances and go back to mileage?
Councilmember Kennedy, if somebody has a car, like I believe, Chief St. John does, he does not get a car allowance. If they have a city car that they are driving, there is no car allowance for that. And then, sorry, you asked about.
I asked that
Why
if we
is
could
there-
go mileage and then they could turn in the
that would-
mileage.
Yeah, that would have to be a decision, I guess, that we make in
Is that a
traffic.
decision by the council?
It's pay related, so usually it's administration, I think.
Yeah, Councilmember Kennedy, Mayor and Council, so haven't made any meaningful changes in that system. I want to say over the past 6 years, we've added 1 or 2 individuals. I'd look at a couple of different things. What is the market for that? Sometimes the positions may be tied to market. The primary should be usage, that the job has someone driving. And there's a decision made whether we supply them with a vehicle or with a car allowance. But if someone's getting a car allowance, like myself, I don't use a city vehicle you don't do both. I get the car allowance, that's how that works. Haven't looked into it, would be happy to look and see, do a check as to what's the system look like across. There's actually some good reason to do it beyond just a compensation standpoint. We know moving to the city hall, we're going to have a real challenge on parking. So how we use fleet vehicles, whether we allow them to be driven home if someone lives within the city limits, may be an economically wise thing for us to do versus renting the parking spaces that they would need to be in the garage. So all that to say, if you want us to look into what are car allowances or employees who are getting those benefits, we can look into that.
Chris, I think you're going to need to look at car allowances and you're going to have to look at parking because as you brought up, people are discrimination because they may be getting less pay than someone else. You're offering some people parking and other people you're not. So I think you better look at that. Car allowances is a big thing because there were 10 people with car allowances and that's 48,000. That's a lot of money. And I probably missed a few. And so I would do that. The question I have is, and I'm going to go back to, we have raised to 60% the department heads, the 20 or so that you made the market study on. I know you did some others this year, but really what you've worked on the last 2 years was department heads. When you hire department heads, the question I have is, are they supposed to hit the ground running and be able to come to a council meeting and be able to answer questions and to be able to do the work, or is it on-the-job training until they've been here a year or so? I guess that's a concern I have for paying top-notch dollars for people. My expectations is they should be able to answer our questions. They should be able to get the things done. They should be able to not bring things that are half done to the council. Those are things that I see in the last 6 months. And then when I saw the salaries, I thought, my goodness, are we doing it on-the-job training or are we hiring people at the top-notch dollars? So that's a question for you, Chris, because I've been a little disappointed. I'm seeing the salaries and then I'm seeing some of the work that comes forward and I'm disappointed.
Councilmember Kennedy, Mayor and Council. So the expectation is that, certainly they should be able to, and I and Kevin answer your questions, be prepared, do a good job. Does that mean there is no difference between an employee who may who gets hired as a director or promoted into a director who's never sat in that seat, and there won't be a learning curve to it, yeah, there'll be a learning curve, and that's a little different than someone who maybe is coming from another organization where they've been a director for a decade or something. So I think human nature, there's going to be some differences based on their experience, but definitely anybody who is in that level of a position in this organization at this compensation, that they can do an excellent job at what they do. Now, again, just a reminder, what is 60% of market, which I think is fair. That's why we landed at 60% of market at step 7. That means, in theory, 40% of the people who have that title across similar organizations are going to be making more money than our person does. 59% are going to be making less. So I too believe that compensation is an important part of that motivation, but I don't believe it is the primary or the only motivation. So,
And all I would ask is, if you're hiring a person that's inexperienced, don't pay him the top of the scale then.
so they would typically be coming in at one of those lower steps. And like I said, 60% is step 7, and each step is 5%. So that person, if we were hiring someone straight out, they just met the minimum qualifications, they've never stood in that seat before, and the market allows us to offer them that job at step 1, that's where they're going to come in at step 1, and it's going to take 7 years for them to get to. Or fairness, also through COVID, we accelerated those steps too. We've had some people get promoted in those positions that moved quicker than 7 years because I think the proof was the quality of their work. They didn't need to take 7 years to get to that point.
But the question is, directors, department heads, you eliminated the longevity so they don't go on the steps.
No, the steps are still there, 1 through 7. The longevity just means from year 8 through year whatever, 30 or 40, there's not an automatic increase because of their longevity here.
So, Colin, you want to comment on I
Councilmember
guess the
Kennedy.
discretionary element of steps versus
Yeah,
longevity?
Can you hear me? Councilmember Kennedy, if we bring somebody in and they aren't to the level of experience that we think they need to be, no, in my career, we've not brought people in at step 7. They don't. They come in, like Chris said, at step 2 or step 3. Even our directors, if they're not, we've not, in my time, with the exception of the airport director, that shattered our pay system. We've never brought anyone in at step 7, not even at the director level. There's been times we've had to bring them in at step 5 or 6, but not step 7. That airport hire was the first one we've had to do that.
Well, and that didn't start at step 7 either.
No,
I'm
it
pretty
didn't.
sure it didn't start
Well,
at 7 because as
our-
long as the market doesn't demand it, we believe we can get the right person. I always have wanted, both here and elsewhere, you, especially someone who hasn't worked in the organization, you won't know how well they perform until they actually do the work. I mean, there's only so much you can get from an application and interview process.
Okay. Councilor Kennedy has 2 more questions?
Just to follow up on that, I would just say, then it's your responsibility as the city administrator to make sure that they're up to snuff. And I guess as a council, you answer directly to the council, then we can come back and we would go directly to the city administrator. And so I guess these people need to, or you need to address it if they're not up to snuff.
That's correct.
Okay. 2 questions. Why are salaried positions, especially your department heads, should be 40 hours a week plus, and they should be around Monday through Friday? Because that's what the working public works. And I just asked that question because there's a lot of people that work 4 days and they're not around here on Fridays. So the question is, if the city administrator is here Monday through Friday, why aren't your department heads the same?
We have a flexible schedule. There are a number of people who do work both at the director, assistant director, and elsewhere. More of a 4-10 schedule. That being said, those who are on 410s, all that are directors, there's a need, if we have meetings, things that they need to be here on, and Friday is that typical day off. I have some people who do it just seasonally, some people do it year-round, then that's something that they know we're willing to do too, is that I realize you're generally on a 410 schedule, but we got a team meeting, or we need to resolve this issue. They're coming in on that day, or these days, especially post-COVID, through COVID, people are getting work done from home or elsewhere. So I guess what I hear you challenging me to is you're saying in your philosophy, every directors or whatever level position should always be here a minimum of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Yes. The reason that comes up is you have some departments that you have just supervisors that come in on a weekend because you have people working on a weekend and we pay them overtime. That why aren't we having the salaried people who are already paying, instead of paying someone else an extra day of overtime? Because I'm looking at overtime from department to department and wondering why that doesn't take place.
So we're not paying anybody overtime to come in and cover a shift for a director. There's no comp time, and there's no overtime that's coming in that regard. In fact, I can go back to my 20-some years in Montana where I've had assistant directors and directors where you and the general public, elected officials and general public would know no different, that the relationship was such that assistant director maybe covered that other day, and it was never an issue over 5 years or an extended period of time because of the professionalism, knowledge, skills, and expertise. So, I mean, again, what I hear you saying, Councilmember Kennedy, is you personally believe if you're going to be a director in this organization, your expectation of me is they should be required to be here a minimum of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
The last thing I would like to have is a yearly orientation on salaries, Carla, steps, the cost of living, adjustments, so the council is fully aware of what's going on. I asked questions of different council people, and they didn't know. They knew you did a study. They, information that we got, I asked about different salaries, and I had to go back to the budget book from before, the year before. So I ask that we at least do, as we're doing our budgeting process, that we go through some type of orientation or a work session with the council, so we're fully aware before we put that budget together of what may be coming up.
Councilmember Kennedy, we can definitely do that. And again, we already know, our pay structure is not changing. It'll be, increased for Teamsters at 4%, fire at 3% for next year, and then at whatever happens with non-bargaining and police. So that'll be, the structures won't change any. It'll just be whatever inflationary adjustment they're adjusted.
And I'm looking at that with the number of employees and what the amount of dollars we're going to be needing and things like that. It should be very congruent together of what the total dollars are for salaries, what changes may be taking place, and what your committee has decided to do on any changes on positions and stuff, just to keep us up to snuff.
When I talk about the class and comp committee, like we discussed earlier, that would meet to possibly upgrade positions, just for your information. If we did, 3 to 5 positions a year, and I will tell you that probably 1 or 2 of those 5 would probably be approved for a reclassification. It is very rare that we do that. And now that we have the market study the way we are, I anticipate we won't look at anything for at least 3 years. Just so we're aware.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any final questions? Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Denise?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a question about negotiations. if we are in a year, and we're always in a year when we're negotiating, we're never outside of a year of negotiation. So when we're negotiating there and the budget is created, as you said, there's sort of an expectation that the funding for increases from those negotiations have to be thought about and somehow built in. But is it also true that we don't publicly disclose what we anticipate to have to settle on? I mean, there's a part of this, it's real negotiation. So I just want you to speak to that, because previously, I remember one time we had a meeting about negotiations that were contentious. And so I just want you to speak about that. How public and transparent can we be in the middle of a negotiation about how much we anticipate to have a pay increase or other changes? Thank you.
Councilmember Joy, I guess we would prefer not to talk about it, at least publicly. Because we need to set what we believe we can negotiate, whatever rate that is, if it's 3%, 2.9, whatever that is, or whatever we build in the budget. But it's still a negotiation. And if they come in knowing it's 2.9 and, they want more, I mean, it just depends. It just depends on what the inflationary number is, what that is going to look like, and if we can get it settled at 2.9 or 3%. Police cannot strike, but we can go to fact-finding and arbitration. And then an arbitrator will determine that rate of pay if we get to that point.
Okay,
So,
it looks like Chris
Yeah,
might comment on that
Councilmember
comment.
Joy
Go ahead.
and Mayor and Council, the only piece I would add is, by law, we are not allowed to go into an executive session to have that conversation. It's not, the public's right to know exceeds the privacy right. And that's the standard in Montana. So then what Karen will help me with if I step over a line is conversations and a communication with council. It'll commonly happen in groups, but it cannot be of decisions because it can't be a rolling meeting. So it's not, are you authorizing me to put this much on the table? You won't hear me ask that. But we will have meetings, we'll say, this is where we're at, this is where the bargaining, this is how that conversation is going. But we literally, someday when someone sits in this seat and they're not accustomed to Montana, it's going to be a wake-up call. You are, by law, not allowed to have an executive session to have a conversation about negotiating that labor contract. So that's just a part of what we have to live with. And so there's just a sensitivity to what's the amount in the budget, what do we think we can live with, and what's the bargaining, how successful are we at the bargaining table at coming close to that?
Okay, Councilor Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to chime in with Councilmember Kennedy said. I do agree. I think that the directors should be here 5 days a week. And I'm not saying that every employee is like this, but it tends to be when your managers, directors out there, there tends to be a little bit more of those who have that bent will not work as much. They will slack off. There's just different things, or if a customer issues arises, they're just not there. So I would agree that they should be there 5 days a week. The other thing I did have a question, because Chris, you mentioned this, or someone mentioned the after step 7. I wasn't quite sure what happens. How is the increases done after 7? Is that your discretion then after 7? So you could do a 20% raise, a 5% raise, a no raise after step 7?
We tip the adjustment to the matrix is typically by an inflation number. So in theory, right, if you just looked over the past decade as an example, you'd see that thing moved almost richly 2.3%. So step 7 would move 3.3%, and that person who is in step 7, the disagreement I would have is if they're on a performance improvement plan, I don't necessarily think we would give them the inflationary adjustment if they were on a performance improvement plan or if they were under discipline. But to answer your question, that's typically what would happen is that step 7 adjusted by inflation, they would stay in that step 7 and it would be adjusted by 3%.
But if they're well over the step 7.
In theory, there shouldn't be over the step 7. Now, with 1,100 employees in market and movement, in all directions. It does happen, but typically a person shouldn't find themselves out in front of step 7.
Okay, so your directors are not, the directors fall within the same 7 steps?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and our pay system is set up that it will not let them go past step 7.
Okay,
That is built into there. So step 7 is their max, but it is adjusted then by that inflationary number every July 1,
okay.
or a negotiated number.
And then Carla, real quick about the steps, because there are 7 steps. It seems like you're saying that we have to bring a lot of people in the middle. So do we even use step 1 or step 2?
We are now.
We are now.
Yes,
Because you made adjustments,
Yes,
you
since
increased them
July
all
1st, we've been able to hire more positions in step 1.
in step 1, because all the steps have increased
Yes.
substantially. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Any other questions for Carla or comments on this topic? I found it very interesting. I've learned a lot, but I don't want to cut anything off. Anything else, Councilmember Joy?
Thank
Before
you.
we wrap up.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I do appreciate Councilmember Refsis's comment about performance. And I think of, very much, I think of my own job. And when you do public service, you're not making widgets. So you can't count widgets. And you can't sell more insurance, and you can't offload more textbooks. When you do this kind of work, I'm not speaking across the board in every position, but when you do this kind of work, there aren't a lot of ways to make more widgets. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Anything else? I don't see anything. So thank you, Carla. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Karen, everybody who worked on this, appreciate it. I think it's been a good process. So we look forward to staying up to date on this process now that we have a good baseline of how it works.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Our agenda calls for public comment after each one of these items, but there aren't any members of the public to comment. So I guess we will skip that item. And Chris, anything in the way of future agenda items that you want to call to our attention?
So we will, 2 weeks from tonight or the next work session, we will get back into the strategic plan. Gavin has been working on simplifying it, seeing if that can't get some movement at this table. And then the capital improvement plan will be coming to you here. We're just a couple months away from that. That's the next, I think, big policy call, and really is a feeder into the FY26 budget. So those are some things I'd flag. It also, so 2 weeks, 1 week from tonight. So we got some things coming back, right? So the setting the mill levy, that's on your agenda, as well as the planning board process relative to being in compliance with statute. So those are a couple issues coming back, and then quite a few land use. There's quite a few subdivisions and land use things on your agenda 7 nights from tonight. I know that's not the primary purpose, but just to give you a heads up, pretty thick packet with a lot of land use stuff, and those two things that are coming forward.
Okay, I've seen hands from Councilor Neese and Kennedy on this topic or council discussion for this. Okay, go ahead.
Chris, I noticed the legislative priorities are on the consent agenda, but my understanding was we would be talking more about that, having a work session about that.
Yeah,
well,
not a work session, but I did anticipate that would have been on me then, miscommunication. I thought they were on the regular agenda. We did have them scheduled per the committee's recommendation for next Monday on your regular agenda. So I'll just ask that you take it off consent, make it the last action item for discussion and approval.
Okay, thank you very much. I
Very good.
appreciate that.
Councilor Kenny, Councilor Ron?
Chris, on the planning commission, that's not a done deal, is it?
It's not a done deal. It's just the resolution is put together. You had it on your agenda a week ago, and now it's coming back. We made some adjustments to it per some feedback that we got.
Sure, but the question I would ask is, with the planning commission, the staff recommended just going with the same one. Can we address that at this time, at that time?
Sure, any way if you want to.
Yeah, I have some concerns about just going back and just appointing the same.
So I would say, what I'm hearing you say, Councilmember Kennedy, is you've got some deeper concerns about doing what was presented, what was on the agenda a week ago. You'll have the authority to change it. It is coming back to you a week from tonight with some technical changes that came out of the process, but that particular area, I would be prepared to make an amendment, whether you want to move it, punt it to a future agenda, or make an amendment to it that night to change it how you would see fit. It's advertised and fully within your authority to adjust it however you would see fit.
Very good. And my only request on that is if we can generate written language changes by email beforehand, it gives people a chance to look at them and think about them in advance. So, Councilmember Rowan?
Thanks, Mayor. I just sort of had a similar question, just in terms of guidance. I've raised some concerns about the balance and diversity of opinions on the committee. And I'm just wondering if there was an internal discussion and sort of a decision, no, actually, this is fine, or did it just not get discussed at all? Because it would just be helpful for me in terms of doing exactly what the mayor's suggesting.
So I think two pieces there. One is, in our staff discussion, there's a desire, that nobody speak against the idea of having more diversity on the boards. Ultimately, how you choose to appoint, or if you want to do something different here, that's strongly supported by staff. We just see board appointments as the council's, yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette?
So, Chris, has Andy hired our budget analyst yet? Question.
I know that there were interviews a little over a week ago, and there were a couple of finalists there. I do not know if an offer was made today or not, but we're very close to that offer. It doesn't mean we'll have a person land, but yes, that process, recruitment took place, finalists were interviewed, and a job offer, I believe, was made today.
Okay, very good. We've kind of had some council discussion. Any further council discussion? Okay, there's no public comment on non-agenda items, so we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take the rest of